Welcome back to Diabolic Freak. In this episode, we will open the case of H. Holmes, a charming and intelligent young man who's got away with murder on many occasions. When you Google the world's first serial killer, H. Holmes tops the list. Who is he? What was his modus operandi? And why did he say, "I was born with the devil in me"? Herman Webster Mudgett, better known as H. Holmes, was born on May 16, 1861, into a wealthy family. As the son of Levi Horton Mudgett and Theodate Page Price, Holmes is one of the world's most prolific serial killer of all time. The young Holmes took up teaching and worked around the towns of Gilmanton, New Hampshire, where he was born. Growing up, he had an interest in medicine and allegedly lured and trapped animals to practice surgery on them. On July 4, 1878, a year after graduating from high school, Holmes married Clara Lovering at the age of 17. Clara eventually gave birth to their son, Robert Lovering Mudgett, 2 years later. When Holmes turned 18, he enrolled into University of Vermont, but soon grew bored of it. After dropping out of the university, Holmes studied medicine at University of Michigan the following year, where he found interest dissecting living species and skeletons using corrosive chemicals. At the same period, the young Holmes worked in the anatomy lab, learning about the human body systems through studying the human cadavers. Having access to these human cadavers, Holmes began using the bodies to earn him quick bucks through insurance scams. On August 1886, Holmes relocated to Chicago and received a job offer as a pharmacist with a drugstore owned by Elizabeth Holton. Holmes introduced himself to Elizabeth as Henry Holmes or Dr. H. Holmes. Located at the corner of South Wallace Avenue, the drugstore was right across the street where he would build his famous murder castle later on. At that time, Elizabeth's husband was diagnosed with cancer and was gravely ill. Hence, besides looking after the drugstore business, Elizabeth had to look after her frail husband. Eventually, out of goodwill, Holmes bought over the business while allowing the couple to keep their home upstairs. Shortly after taking over, the Holtons vanished without a trace and was later rumored to be murdered by Holmes. Across the street from the drugstore, Holmes purchased an empty lot and began building his castle. The purpose of the castle was to lure customers into staying in the apartments located within the building, killing them, and then taking over the victims' properties. With this in mind, Holmes designed the interior on his own, which featured a drugstore on the first level, hotel rooms on the second level, and apartments as well as his office on the top. Constructions began in 1887, and Holmes repeatedly changed architects and builders to ensure no one found out about his secret project. The serial killer in the making was the only one who would know how to escape murder from his castle. To Holmes, the castle was his very own slaughterhouse, but to the public, it was the World's Fair Hotel. Guests who rented his hotel complained they couldn't understand its odd interior. There were doors that led to no rooms and stairways that led to nowhere. And due to the lack of windows, many rooms see no daylight at all. Many guests were reported missing after checking in and out of the hotel. With his charm and eloquence, Holmes began dating women, luring them into his hotel, making fake promises to marry them, swindling their pockets, and eventually killing them to take over their properties. One of the earlier known victims was his mistress, Julia Connor, the wife of Ned Connor. Holmes offered Julia a job in his drugstore's jewelry counter and the couple began dating. Julia's husband eventually found out about the affair and moved away, leaving behind Julia with her daughter, Pearl. Holmes convinced Julia he would marry her if she let him perform the abortion of their unborn child. On December 1891, Julia and her daughter, Pearl, disappeared from the public eye. With his medical knowledge, wide connection and experience working at the anatomy lab, Holmes turned his murders into profits through the sale of body parts. After dissecting the bodies, the skeletons and organs would be sold to medical schools for educational purposes. The rest of the remains were broken down with acid mixtures and eventually discarded. Over the next couple of years, Holmes murdered Emmeline Sigrand, who worked in the castle on May 1892. She later disappeared in December the same year. Other women who had vanished included Edna Van Tassel and one-time actress Minnie Williams, whom he met in an employment office. Holmes later offered her a job as a stenographer in his drugstore and persuaded her to transfer the deed of her property to him. Both Minnie Williams and Minnie's sister, Nanny Williams, vanished shortly thereafter. Holmes' killings were said to have peaked in 1893 during the Chicago World's Fair. Since many guests flocked to the city, and a large number of them didn't go straight home after, it was common to have guests reported missing. With a number of insurance claims that Holmes was defrauding, insurance investigators were slowly closing in on the trickster. Sensing the investigators could catch up with him soon, Holmes left Chicago and fled to Texas. In July 1894, Holmes moved to St. Louis and was eventually arrested for selling a horse that he didn't own. During his time in jail, Holmes met Marion Hedgepeth, a career criminal known as the Debonair Bandit. He plotted another insurance fraud that would make him and Hedgepeth some money. The plan was to fake his own death and collect the insurance payout. He offered Hedgepeth $500 for a trustworthy lawyer's contact to process the fraudulent paperwork. Holmes' jail term was a brief one. He was promptly out on bail and traveled back to Philadelphia. Around this time, Holmes met his long-term friend, Benjamin Pite Zerl, who became his right-hand man for his crime schemes and ultimately, his victim. He visited the lawyer recommended by Hedgepeth and shared the fraud scam idea. Although the lawyer found the scheme to be brilliant, he rejected to participate in the fraud scheme. So, Holmes went on faking his own death but failed as the insurance company became suspicious and refused to pay the assurance sum. Fearing another jail term, Holmes did not press on the claim. Instead, he concocted the same plan, this time with Benjamin Pite Zerl. They decided to defraud the insurance company through faking Pite Zerl's demise. Pite Zerl was told to purchase a $10,000 life insurance, which would amount to slightly over $300,000 today. The plan was to let Pite Zerl fake his own death so that his wife could collect the $10,000 claim. She would receive $500 for her participation. Both Holmes and Pite Zerl left Chicago and traveled to different parts of America, including New York and Texas, to continue in other acts of fraud. While in Philadelphia, Holmes then decided to really kill Pite Zerl. He allegedly made the victim unconscious, knocking him off with chloroform and then setting his body on a blaze. The swindler collected the insurance policy payout, this time using Pite Zerl's real body. He later convinced the unsuspecting widow that her husband is still alive, giving her the $500 he had promised. Later on, he manipulated Pite Zerl's wife into giving Holmes the custody to her 3 children, Alice, Howard and Nellie. The widow was then escorted to London, where she was told where Pite Zerl was hiding, while Holmes and the 3 children moved on to Canada. Worried that Pite Zerl's children might alert the police, Holmes killed the 2 girls, Alice and Nellie. Their bodies were buried in the basement of his Toronto apartment. On November 17, 1894, Holmes' murder spree would come to an end. His former cellmate, Marion Hedgepeth, alerted investigators about the serial killer's insurance fraud plan. The authorities finally tracked and arrested him in Boston. Frank Jayer, a Philadelphia police detective, was assigned to investigate on the 3 missing Pite Zerl children. He discovered Alice and Nellie Pite Zerl's decomposed bodies in the cellar of Holmes' Toronto home. Detective Jayer quoted, "The deeper we dug, the more horrible the odor became. When we reached a depth of 3 feet, we discovered what appeared to be the bone of the forearm of a human being." The detective then followed the serial killer to Indianapolis, where Holmes had previously purchased drugs to kill Howard Pite Zerl. The investigation uncovered the boy's teeth and bones at Holmes' Indianapolis cottage chimney. As investigations began crawling in, Holmes' killing spree became apparent. The custodians of his murder castle were never allowed to clean the top floor where the apartments and his office were located. The Chicago police uncovered the murder castle's soundproof rooms, staircases that led to nowhere, and the disorienting maze with rooms fitted with trapdoors and the kiln at the basement. Holmes was charged for the murder of Benjamin Pite Zerl and his 3 children, Alice, Howard and Nellie, and was sentenced to death. During his custody, Holmes admitted to killing 27 victims, but gave different accounts on different occasions. He would initially claim innocence and later claim he was possessed by Satan. He wrote his confessions in prison and stated how he was starting to look more like the devil. On May 7, 1896, Holmes was hung for the murder of Benjamin Pite Zerl. Fearing grave robbers who might steal his body and use it for dissection, Holmes asked for his coffin to be cemented and buried at least 10 feet under. His request was granted. In 2017, H.H. Holmes' body was exhumed for testing as rumors had spread that Holmes had faked his own execution by bribing officials to substitute a cadaver for his own body. If this were true, he would have escaped death and be freed. The great-grandchildren of Holmes, John, Richard and Cynthia Mudgett, requested to exhume the body for testing. Dental records determined that the serial killer was executed and buried in the casket. Ironically, H. Holmes' intelligence also led to his downfall. Had he decided to stop the fraudulent cases and instead continued selling skeletons and organs to medical schools, he probably wouldn't be caught, at least, not for a while. What do you think of the case of America's first serial killer? Do you think he was the devil? If you enjoyed this case, be sure to subscribe and give us your feedback. See you next time in another case recap. Stay safe.